Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another in our series of In Conversation with Lawyers. And I'm delighted today to be talking with James Walker, who's one of our law graduates and who's now a solicitor at Leathes Prior in Norwich. James, thanks very much for doing this.
Thank you, David. Yeah, and thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to do it, and I'm looking forward to hopefully offering some insight to anyone who's like to tune in.
Great. Why don't we just start by you describing the firm that you're working for and the areas of law that you enjoy in your current practice, particularly as this is the first chance we've had to talk to someone working in a local law firm or a firm with a regional presence. So why don't you just start by introducing us to that?
Absolutely, yeah. So I am, as you mentioned previously, I work for a firm called Leathes Prior Solicitors, and we operate in the centre of Norwich. We've got 4 offices all in the centre of Norwich, and at the moment I practice and will continue to practice in the wills, trusts and probate department in the firm, and sometimes also called private client, where, as the name would suggest, the majority of our work falls into sort of 3 or 4 broad categories, dealing with wills and estate planning for individuals, establishing and helping them to manage lifetime trusts and their duties as trustees, and then powers of attorney and deputyships for individuals who either have lost capacity or are concerned about losing capacity, or advising the attorneys who act on their behalf. And then lastly, probate. Obviously, the main sort of core of our work is assisting when somebody has passed away with managing their affairs and sorting out their estates.
That's very interesting and helpful. How large is the firm? What's the sort of size?
The firm at the moment, we're growing quite rapidly recently, actually. I believe we have over 100, might be 100 to 120 sort of staff. In terms of the actual numbers of lawyers there, I'm not entirely sure. I think we've got sort of around 60 or so
Yeah.
fee earners.
Yeah, so it's still a sizable presence. And I do know that your sort of interests in the direction in which you wanted to work did change over the course of you going through your career thinking. And certainly I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile on my other screen here. And
Mm.
you did your internship in a major London firm at one point.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk the audience through the way that evolved and changed and why perhaps you became attracted to what you're doing now?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So certainly when I was at Cambridge, I was considering going into a London firm, and if I could manage it, working at a Magic Circle firm. And I did do a vacation scheme, yeah, in London, and I also did some internships and work experience at various different businesses in London, as well as law firms. And I did enjoy that for the most part, although I personally found that obviously the main focus of the city firms tends to be towards, quite a lot of the time, financial or corporate based areas of practice. There are notable exceptions to that. Contentious work can sometimes sort of steer a little bit away from that, but for the most part you're dealing with large companies, and I found that the work there, for that reason, and during my vacation scheme, I found it quite hard to engage with that. And I wasn't sure if it was for me. So having spent some time working in London, I decided that I would then perhaps try working at a firm local to me. And the best option, that in my view, was Leathes Prior. It had the benefit of also being very close to sort of where I grew up as well, and I knew the area and liked the firm and knew it was well respected in the community as well. So I did some work experience here and absolutely loved it, and I found that it was actually shocking quite how different the work was to a city firm. That's not to say that there aren't similarities in some areas. Obviously, we do have a corporate team, a commercial property team, and lawyers who deal with those areas of practice. But there's also perhaps a bigger emphasis on some practice areas that you might see less of at large city firms, unless they're perhaps a specialized practice that specifically deals with those, like family law, private client, and the like. So I really enjoyed some of those areas a bit more than I had the finance and corporate type of stuff in the city.
I can see why that would make a difference to your engagement and why you found it interesting, which is really valuable to hear. Would you highlight any experiences whilst you were training, perhaps of a skills nature, which you think stand you in good stead in the long term? And there are significant differences, I think, in transferable skills from local firms to corporate city firms.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you highlight a good point, which is that it's not just the perhaps more practice areas or different practice areas available, but it is also a different kind of training, at least from my understanding. Obviously, you can only do your training one place. So I don't know exactly what it's like in sort of London city firms. But what I can say is that certainly you're probably more likely to have, I think, early responsibility and deal with things perhaps a bit more independently in a regional firm, partly on account of the fact that the firm is likely to be smaller, so therefore more of the legwork and responsibility might fall on trainees, where perhaps in a city firm there would be more qualified lawyers and NQs in particular, who might be able to absorb some of the work that more experienced and senior lawyers are either unable to do or simply don't want to do. Whereas, certainly here, trainees do have quite a significant role in actually pushing forward files and matters in terms of the substantive work and legwork that they require. And as you spend more time in a practice area, you will, and in a seat, you will potentially be able to do some work entirely independently. So I did reach a point where I was, during my training contract, meeting with clients on my own, determining what it was that they would need and discussing that with my supervisor, and then actually going from start to finish, really entirely doing all the work myself, obviously with the supervision and oversight of my supervising partner. So yeah, in terms of the skills that draws out, I think you have to become very confident dealing with people, and you're unlikely to be perhaps dealing with not unlikely to be dealing with other professionals. You'll do that a lot, but you will be more likely to also deal with individuals who perhaps aren't professionals. They might be lay people who know nothing about the law, whereas potentially in larger city firms you might have more exposure to individuals working in city businesses, or perhaps dealing with an in-house legal team for a big company. So there's a slight sort of, there's a bit of a difference in terms of what your clientele might be. Again, a fair amount of generalizing here, but I think by and large the patterns would show that.
And just before we move on, anything you'd want to observe just from the experiences you had doing your internships? Anything about work-life balance? Positive or negative?
Yeah. I mean, again, I can't speak for every city firm or every regional firm, but certainly I think when I was working in the city, and I don't think it's any real secret that they will expect you to sort of spend as much of your time as you can really in the office. That's not true of every firm, but certainly the ones I went to, there were some, I remember on my vacation scheme, some rather shocked looks and expressions, and sort of words to the effect of, aren't you doing well on a Wednesday, when someone was leaving the office at around sort of 9-10 o'clock, whereas here you would probably be chastised if somebody found out that you were still in the office at 9-10 o'clock. I mean, by and large, people will be making their way out of the office between sort of 5:30 and 6:30, depending on what their workloads are. And as with any, I think, lawyer, there will obviously be times when you need to to start sort of burning the midnight oil, to coin an old phrase. But I think that happens a lot less frequently here than it would in a city firm. It's one of the benefits of working at a regional firm is you should expect to have a much better work-life balance.
Good. Okay. Well, that was good to cover that. Why don't you go over some of the advice you'd offer for anybody now interested in a regional firm or a local firm about one that offers a training contract? How would you go about engaging with them? What is it important in terms of doing the research, differences to bear in mind, perhaps anything around unsolicited work experience, but just help students position themselves for
Mm.
approaching the non-corporate city firms.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think obviously a lot of the advice that students will have had before about city firms will translate over. It's not an entirely different ball game, but there are definitely differences to keep in mind. I mean, that really what all of my advice will span from is the fact that, you know, there will be much fewer applicants to a regional firm, and therefore it's important that you do your best to really stand out in your application, and bear in mind that you have the luxury perhaps of being able to tailor your application more to a regional firm, perhaps a bit more than you would to a city firm, because I think even though you will be given the very good advice to not create a template application whenever you're applying to a law firm, whether it be city or regional, which you tweak, you might be a bit more likely to sort of get away with that with the city firms, who will share a lot of similarities. But the regional firms, I think, tend to take pride in what makes them unique. And that's certainly true of us. We have a very sort of specific and unique culture of friendliness and sociability and approachability. And we pride ourselves on that. And we're uniquely located, Leathes Prior, as well. So I think for an application to us, I would expect an applicant to try and tailor it to the effect of, this is why I think, based on my personality and my attributes, I fit really specifically with what your firm espouses itself for. In terms of general advice, it's, I think, much better for a regional firm to connect with lawyers directly, and you might have more luck doing that with a regional firm than with a city firm, because I think, if it's a firm with thousands of lawyers, you might sort of get lost in a sea of people when you're trying to reach out to someone in particular and say, I'm interested in joining the firm. Would you be happy to have a chat with me and sort of give me some insight? And even if you did do that, then perhaps the word of that individual solicitor might not carry as much weight because they're one of so many. But I think for a regional firm with a smaller team, it's going to stand you in much better stead if you contact someone directly and reach out to them. It doesn't have to be as direct as, do you want to go and have a coffee and have a chat? It could just be following people on LinkedIn, on social media, going to any firm events or events sponsored by the firm, and just sort of getting your face out there, trying to make yourself known as an enthusiastic and promising candidate to members of the firm. And then that will always give you a leg up when it comes to joining all of the other candidates on an assessment day, if you're able to reach that stage.
I don't know if this is the case with Leathes Prior, but do you, in your knowledge, and you might not know, do you respond to approaches for unsolicited work experience? Obviously, this is something you can't easily do with a corporate in the city. And there might be reasons why it doesn't work well for your firm either. But perhaps based on your own experiences or knowledge of your peers, does an approach for unsolicited work experience work at all well or not?
Yeah, I think it does here. I mean, that was, after all, how I started off at the firm. Is I had no prior contact with anyone who worked here, and simply sent an email to the recruitment email saying, I'm interested in joining the firm and coming to an assessment day. In the meantime, would it be possible for me to join for some work experience? And I believe that, and I know that we do have people on work experience
Right.
come through. It's not particularly regular, and that may well be because so many people are not sure whether it's an acceptable do, but if it's on a case by case basis as
Yeah.
well, whether it can
Yeah.
be arranged. But it's, yeah, I certainly wouldn't caution anyone against doing it. I think it's always worth going that extra mile. And in the worst case scenario, if you get told that it's not possible, at least you've taken the
Yeah.
initiative to go a bit further than someone else would.
That's great. I didn't realize that was what you'd done actually and made that approach. Without saying too much, what sort of things did they get you doing on your work experience? Anything too challenging?
Well, I did actually. I did think it was challenging because at the time that I did it, I had never really done anything closely related to legal work, and I hadn't done my LPC at that time. So it was really, really helpful to get an idea of what practicing law is actually like. But I was given hypothetical sort of cases by some members of the team who said, you know, here's a hypothetical client who's come in to speak to me and said this, can you prepare a draft letter? And you know, in other cases I would be assisting and perhaps joining, you know, fee earners and solicitors for client meetings if clients were happy to have someone on work experience join. But you know, obviously law firms, it is tricky to do work experience because of the confidentiality obligations. But at the time I did that, which was quite a while ago now, it would have been 2017. Yeah, I was able to join in on the actual substantive legal work, but it was mainly drafting, a little bit of more administrative type work, but for the most part, and I think I did actually speak to some people as well over the phone. You know, I was asked to accept a new inquiry and speak with someone. So I think depending on where they gauge you to be, that will determine how much exposure they're happy to give you, really.
That's great, and a real tangible difference, I think, in terms of an experience within a law firm, to be given that sort of input. Why don't we look forward a little bit now to your sort of career trajectory within the sort of firm that you work for, either directly or just generalizing. What sort of things is it useful to bear in mind for a student who's looking beyond the point at which they qualify to what happens next?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really good to take an interest in an area of law early on. And indeed, you're sort of encouraged when you're making your training contract applications and in that recruitment process. There's quite a strong message of, you know, try and convince them that a certain area of law is for you. And I think it's good to see students doing that and engaging with, you know, I know that practicing in this area would be something like this, and this is why I think I would be suitable for it and want to do it. But having said that, I think perhaps a mistake sometimes that candidates and students make is pinning their colours to the mast a bit too much and not remaining open-minded about what practice areas they could enjoy, because it's a very common anecdote that you hear in the legal profession that someone has gone into working and practice and had a very sort of set idea, I want to do X, I want to do Y. And then when they do it, they find that the practice of it is very, very different to the theory of it or the study of it that they might have done before. And they much prefer doing something completely different, which was my experience, really. I had joined the firm wanting to be a litigator, having done debating and a little bit of mooting at university, and really enjoyed the sort of more contentious side of law when I was studying it. And then I did really enjoy litigation. It was my first seat that I did in my training contract, and I found it really engaging. But and I hadn't particularly enjoyed private client or succession law or anything like that at university. I hadn't actually studied it too much. So I came to the wills, trust and probate department of the firm sort of expecting that. The main reason I chose it was because I thought it was the polar opposite of litigation, and I only had one opportunity in my whole career to try different areas of practice, so may as well give something that's completely different a go. And then when I joined the area, there was just a lot that I really liked about it, and I found that it suited me really well, and so I ultimately decided to stay in this department. But if you told me that when I started my training contract, I think I would have thought you were mad, because it's just never been something on my, it was never something on my radar before then. So particularly with regional firms, obviously it sounds like stupid advice, but you'd be shocked how common it is. Don't say that you really want to do a practice area that the firm doesn't offer, because people do it, and it's not going to go down very well. And if you are hoping to do a certain practice area, then I think it's always best to go in with the mindset of, I'm passionate about this and I'd like to try it, but who knows, maybe I'll find something that I enjoy even more, because regional firms will often have a need to try and fill spaces where they arise in different teams, and also the practice of law is very different to the study of it, so you never really know until you get there sat in front of a client.
That's been great. Just a very short answer to this one, if you like, because you and I have touched on it before. The profile that you enjoy as a solicitor in a region as compared to, say, the heart of the City of London, what are there any benefits to that professionally, do you think?
Do you mean in terms of sort of where you might stand in the
Yeah,
community,
yeah.
yeah, compared to a city firm? Yeah, I think definitely there are. I mean, obviously, again, it's not that, you know, there aren't thousands of people in Norwich, but it's obviously a smaller pool than you would have in the city, and you're one of fewer lawyers. So certainly I think if you're in practice for a while and you build a good reputation, particularly if you have a strong presence these days on social media, on LinkedIn and in marketing, then you are bound to attract attention from all different parts of the community, and work will inevitably flow towards you, because you will build that profile and that reputation as a sort of trusted advisor in the community. Partly because I think there are fewer, as you say, there are just fewer lawyers in the pool to be potential options for people. So if you can build yourself a reputation as being really trusted and consistent and friendly, then people will speak to their friends and colleagues, and ultimately I think you can kind of sprawl out and really build a big network, much perhaps a little bit easier than you might when you're one of so many solicitors of so many city firms.
Great. Well, picking up on your phrase there, trusted advisor, just for a final question, if I may, do you want to just leave the audience with a final piece of careers advice, either from you directly or one that you valued being given in your career? What's your final piece of careers advice, do you think?
Sure. I mean, I think there's one that immediately jumps to mind, and it's because I hear it so much. I mean, obviously, I'm not involved in any real sense in the recruitment at the firm. That's for much more senior members than I. But it's something that when I discuss with them how sort of a trainee assessment days and the like have gone, that I hear so much. And that is to be yourself, but not in the cliched, don't pretend to be someone else or hide things on your CV or anything like that. But perhaps when you hear be yourself, don't think I'm going to be honest and true to myself, which you should, but over and above that, try and let a little bit of your personality show when you're making an application, because you have to think about what the partner's experience is when they do an assessment day. They'll have hundreds and loads and loads of students come through, and all of them will say, I'm really interested in law, I've got great academic background, I'm a hard worker. They'll all say those things. If you can do something to show them that not only will you be an effective and successful professional, but that you are a nice person to work with, you're going to make a valuable member of the team and fit in long term, and that you're going to be, above all else, a fun person, a nice person to work with, then you're much more likely to I think be successful. So yeah, try, and obviously you don't need to go divulging all of your private secrets or saying what your favorite book or film is or something as cliched as that, but just try and relax a bit, let out a little bit of your own personality and a bit of flair, and I think you'll have much better success in endearing your prospective interviewers.
Well, that's a great point to leave it. And it is, as you say, really important to try and show that you'd be an engaging person to work with, because it is long hours that you spend working with your colleagues. And in a
Yeah.
regional firm, that might have quite an impact on quite a few people. So I'm really pleased that you left it at with that piece of advice, James. Many thanks for doing this. It's been a great pleasure.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Likewise, a real pleasure to take part, and absolutely delighted to have had the chance.